And welcome everybody to another edition of the GSMC Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Kenneth Gruenfelder, and as always, it's great to have you guys here on this Tuesday. We have a lot to talk about on the show today. Before I get into that, I just want to remind you guys to tip or donate and get your comments recognized. Make sure to go to the following link. That is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. Again, that really helps the show, makes the show more interactive between myself, the host, and you, the viewer. Once again, the link, streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. And as always, it is displayed on the ticker on the bottom of the show segment down below. So with that, let's get right into what we are going to talk about on the show today. We're going to start off by recapping last night's Monday night game between the Chicago Bears and the Minnesota Vikings. The Bears getting a 12-10 win over the Vikings, so we'll get into that in a bit. A great game last night. A lot of scoring, as you could see. In the second part of the show, we're going to talk about the Denver Broncos and how they performed over the last several weeks, and whether or not, hey, maybe they can make the playoffs. So we'll get into that. We'll look at the updated draft order after Week 12. So we'll look at where the teams are currently and who they could maybe get. And then in the final part of the show, we'll go over the current standings around the league, and we'll see how the wild card is currently shaping out in both conferences. So with that, let's get right into the first topic, which is discussing last night's game between the Vikings and the Bears. And yeah, it was not a very entertaining game. It did get off to a good start because you had the Bears going on this great drive. They almost had the ball for like the whole. Well, not really, but it seemed like it. On the first drive of the game, they went 10 plays, 72 yards, almost 6 minutes of time of possession. Oh wait, no, that's the second quarter. Never mind, I lied. No, 14 plays, 47 yards, 9 minutes of time of possession. Their second drive was a field goal. I mean, all of that for nothing, and that was a typical Bears drive. A lot of short plays on this first drive. But yeah, then Carlos Santos missed a field goal, 48-yarder. And so we're like, okay, well, let's see what the Vikings do with it. They went 3 plays, -7 yards on their first drive. It was actually a deep pass on the Vikings' first drive. Dobbs tried to hit Jordan Addison for a big game, but it ended up being incomplete. But people were like, oh, maybe it was complete. But he never really had full control of the ball as he was going to the ground. And he was fighting with the Bears' defensive back on that. But he couldn't reel it in. So then after that, Ty Chandler, 1-yard run. Then Dobbs got sacked and they punted. But then the Bears, this is the scoring drive. 10 plays, 67 yards. Almost 6 minutes of time of possession. They kicked the field goal. Carlos Santos from 25 yards out to make it 3-0. Then the Vikings threw a pick. Josh Dobbs' first interception of the night. That didn't lead to anything. Bears punted. Then Dobbs threw another pick. Bears punted. Vikings punted. Bears punted again. Vikings then kicked the field goal. So at the half, it was tied 3-3. Then in the third quarter, Vikings turned it over on downs. Bears kicked a field goal. Josh Dobbs threw another pick, and then the Bears turned that into points to make it 9-3. Then in the fourth quarter, Josh Dobbs threw another interception, and then Justin Fields fumbled on their possession. And then 8 plays, 77 yards. The Vikings went almost 4 minutes of time of possession down the field. Game's first touchdown. Dobbs connected with T.J. Hawkinson from 17 yards out to make it 10-9. Then the Bears fumbled again. And you were hoping maybe the Vikings will turn it into some points to, at least make the Bears have to go for, a touchdown to try to win the game. But they couldn't cash in, get any points out of it. And then the Bears went 10 plays, 66 yards, 2 minutes and 19 seconds of time of possession to kick a go-ahead field goal. Carlos Santos from 30 yards out. And, the Vikings just did a bunch of laterals at the end. And they ultimately lost the game. And they dropped to 6-6, and the Bears improve to 4-8. on the season. And to look at the player stats for this game, Justin Fields, 27 to 37, 217 yards passing, no touchdowns, no picks. But he did lose a couple of fumbles in this game. He was their leading rusher with 59 yards on the ground. DJ Moore, of course, was their leading receiver. He had 11 receptions for 114 yards. Cole Kmet had 7 for 43. Roshan Johnson had 5 for 40. Khalil Herbert had 2 for 14. In terms of sacks for the game, the Bears had 2 sacks in total. Montez Sweat had a sack and a half. So, he's been paying off so far for the Bears. And then also, in terms of interceptions on the day, you had Brisker, who had a sack and a pick. Gordon had a pick. Edwards had a pick. And Jalen Johnson had a pick as well. That was for the Bears. And then for the Vikings, it was a rough day for Josh Dobbs. He went 22 of 32, 185 yards passing, 1 touchdown, 4 interceptions. And, some of them you could say weren't his fault. They got tipped up in the air, but still, he had a rough game. The Vikings, they couldn't run the ball, which, was going to be an issue. Alexander Madison was their leading rusher with 52 yards on the ground. T.J. Hawkinson was their leading receiver, 5 receptions for 50 yards and a touchdown. Vikings had 3 sacks in this game. But and they did obviously get their share of turnovers as well with the fumbles, but the Vikings just really couldn't get anything going on offense all night. Dobbs did not have a good game, and I think they were asking Kevin O'Connell about like who's going to be the quarterback moving forward, and it's kind of curious to hear that because Josh Dobbs has been good. It's just even against Denver, it wasn't a good game, but they still could have won it. They're still going to win this game despite they had the lead despite him throwing 4 picks. But I wouldn't bench Josh Dobbs over this because he played well against the Falcons. You threw him into the fire and he won the game for the Vikings. Then against the Saints, who have been kind of a mess this year, he played well. I think the Vikings' best chance to win is, having Dobbs at quarterback. And on top of that, you're going into the bye, so that's going to give you more time to, help Dobbs out, getting him used to the playbook. And also you're getting Justin Jefferson back. So, I would assume. So I wouldn't bench Josh Dobbs over this performance, although it was very bad. But you got to give the Bears credit. They forced turnovers. Their defense played really well last night. Justin Fields was, he was okay, but still the fumbles, that was an issue. Didn't throw for a ton of yards, no touchdowns in the game. Bears kicked field goals. That was it. And you go and you possess the ball for over 9 minutes. You're supposed to get points out of that, and they got nothing. Now, they should have. That was on, Cairo Santos missing the field goal. But if it wasn't for Cairo Santos, the Bears would have had no points because their offense just couldn't do anything at all last night. But other than, the first drive. But, if it wasn't for the turnovers, who knows. But it was the game was pretty much a snooze fest from the beginning. And I had the Bears originally in my spread pool, but then I switched it to the Vikings. And, of course, that backfired. A lot of the games I switched this week, they pretty much all backfired except for the Texans and Jaguars. I switched to the Jaguars and they won, but they could have very easily lost that game. So I definitely could have had more wins this week. Unfortunately, I did not. And this is why I just, the games I don't switch, I end up losing, and in the games I do switch, I end up losing. So that's why I never know what to do. So we'll see what happens this week if that changes. But for the Vikings now they're 6-6. The last 2 weeks, those are 2 games they could have very easily won. And now you got some teams that are kind of creeping up behind them. You got the Packers behind them. You got the Rams behind them. The Saints at 5-6. So, the Vikings, you got to get Justin Jefferson back. I think they wanted to take their time, of course, because they were sitting in a good spot. But now losing your last two games in a blink of an eye, you're only one game up. So, they should get Jefferson back. They're still not running the football great, which is still going to be a problem. I mean, with Dobbs, it'll help. Although, again, the Bears did a good job. He really didn't, run the ball effectively last night. The Bears pretty much had that all read up. So I don't know. Maybe now it's teams now have an idea of what Dobbs can do in this offense. I mean now that maybe teams are going to continue to do what the Bears did. So the Vikings are going to have to adjust. But like I said, they're going into the bye. So I think that they will definitely look better coming out of the bye. Well, let's see, who do they play? And again, if you get Justin Jefferson back, that definitely helps. Let's see. So the Vikings, after the bye, they will take on the Raiders in Vegas. So, I mean, it's a winnable game, but, I mean, it still could be tough, because the Raiders have definitely looked better since they got rid of McDaniels. I know they kept it competitive with the Dolphins only losing by a score. They did have a 14-0 lead against the Chiefs, and then they blew it. But then you got the Bengals with Jake Browning at quarterback, home against the Lions, which the defense isn't great. Then you're home against the Packers, which, that could very well decide, who makes the playoffs for that wild card spot. Because the Packers now are right behind them, and then you finish the season in Detroit. So, we'll see what happens. I still think right now the Vikings, I would lean more towards them making the playoffs, but I mean, who knows? And then on top of that, you also got Seattle, who we'll talk about because they play Dallas this week. I mean, they're struggling too. So. They've lost a couple of games in a row. So, again, these last several weeks, it's going to be there definitely could be some changes as to who's currently in playoff spots. I mean, this is similar to what happened with the wild card situation in baseball. The National League wild card. I mean, how many times did that change, day to day? So, if you watched, my podcast from that, that was something we talked about a lot. Is the wild card situation. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens going forward. As for the Bears, I mean, they're 4-8. They're not going anywhere. I mean, I don't see them rattling off, 5 in a row to get to 9-8. The offense still doesn't look great, and it really got to make you wonder what they might do with that pick, that number 1 overall pick, if they end up having it. So we'll just have to wait and see. But, the Bears get the win. Vikings get a tough loss there. But they go into their bye, and maybe they come out with Justin Jefferson after the bye. And we'll see what happens. But, again, they're still not running the football great. And listen, I know that they got rid of Dalvin Cook, but, I mean, I think both of them maybe miss each other because Dalvin Cook is doing nothing with the Jets. The Vikings can't really run the ball. I think they both miss each other. So maybe we'll see a reunion. Who knows? Probably not. But I don't know. I think I mentioned that before, in a previous show. But I think they both miss each other because I think Dalvin Cook would be doing a lot better than what the Vikings have currently. But then again, how he's been with the Jets, maybe he'd be doing the exact same thing in Minnesota, but I don't know. So with that, we're going to take our first break of the show, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about the Denver Broncos and how they just continue to rattle off wins. They're now 6-5 on the season. So we'll talk about that when we come back from our first break. So stick around, and we'll be right back here on the GSMC Football Podcast.